Welcome back to This to Digital. We talk about today's most modern titles and the classics that inspire them. I'm your host, Brett Clark.
And I'm Matt Keaton. And this week we're talking about the PlayStation Plus Game of the Month, Days Gone.
Yes, and we do a deep dive into this great title that is now free for people to play on PlayStation. And it was something that we tried to do something a little different here on this week's episode of This to Digital. Mainly because me and Matt took a week off, and by doing so, I was able to put a lot of hours into Days Gone, and it's a game that Matt has talked greatly about on the podcast and has praised quite a bit. And one of the nice things about, the free game of the month is that not having to spend any money on it, you can have a bunch of people try it out, and the game has been receiving pretty decent praise from the PlayStation community, and it's going to be eventually released on PC. And I thought, why not now? This is a great time to talk about it. I just recently beat it. Matt's a pretty huge fan of it. And talk about the future of it and talk about, some of the shortcomings and some of the benefits and artistic directions that it's gone through and promises that it kept from its E3 release. I think the fact that people are talking about Days Gone is a good thing, and I think that we should be able to look at something like this and, get a good podcast out of it. So yeah, welcome back to the podcast, people. So sorry we're taking a week off. We had personal issues going on. It wasn't nothing serious. It's just me and Matt, we've both been super busy. I recently took a promotion at my job, and Matt's been taking more responsibilities at his job. And when you both work big boy jobs, it's difficult to find time to record a podcast and then edit it. And because of that, we ended up investing into equipment, or I did anyways. And I think it's going to be for your guys' benefit because the content's going to be able to come out faster, and we're having a lot more fun doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Days Gone, Matt, let's talk about the story first. I think because the story is really what drives Days Gone to be so popular. It's a good story. Can you describe it for people?
Yeah, so it's not your typical post-apocalyptic setting where everything is wide open and it's just you have free reign to go and do what you please. You do to an extent, but it's more of a type of game where it has a very realistic undertone to it. It's a very, very realistic, simulated, although setting, and it's really down and just gritty. And it's all about a deacon. And early on, you discover kind of the situation that he's kind of found himself in, and you kind of take it from there. It's basically a game that makes you feel love for a lost loved one, and it kind of keeps you on your toes. Is that person alive? Is that person gone? And the game really just makes you feel for the characters. This game being the post-apocalyptic setting in the, I want to say, Northwest, in a simulated setting of Oregon, where the Bend studio actually is. And so it's one of those where you're a biker. You have really close friends that you trust. You really don't trust anybody else. You have a very small, tight-knit family. And this entire infestation has taken over and has left almost nothing left. And so it's a game about survival, struggle, lost loved ones, and a lot of great twists and things along the way. So it comes off immediately as this game that's going to follow the same formula. However, I think it's one of those that if you try it and you play it, you definitely see that it definitely does. As far as the story point goes, it definitely leaves you wanting more, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the thing with, post-apocalyptic stories is that, people look at it and they want to explore the world. And I think that Days Gone did a really good job of not having like zones where like, oh, you can't go past this because there's military guys here that like block it off. It's not like something where you couldn't venture off and go find stuff right away. Which I really liked about that was that it was an open world. It was an open world experience, and I could truly explore as much as I wanted. The earlier parts of the game, I was always wondering, why is this game, trying to not spoil it with like the critic reviews of it, and why is this game not so as highly praised? Because the opening part of Days Gone is some of my favorite parts of the game. Story came in really strong, and the concept is that we're gonna spoil it. I'm just gonna warn everyone right now at home, we're gonna spoil it. For those of you who haven't played it or who want to play it, pause the video now, come back to us, and then watch it. But if you don't care, you've been warned. So in the beginning of the game, Deacon, his wife is injured. She's been stabbed, and there's a helicopter that's extracting civilians, and that's by this company called Nero. And there's a guy in a hazmat suit there. His name's O'Brien. And Deacon comes up to him and pretty much holds a gun to his head and says, "Hey, look, there's more room on this helicopter for people. You're going to take 2 more people." Because he was going to have his friend Boozer and his wife go on there, and he was going to stay behind himself. But, Boozer was injured. He wanted to stay behind and help out Boozer because Boozer wouldn't survive without him. And in doing so, he puts his wife onto the helicopter and gives her his ring. And he says, "I want it back." And she's like, "Yeah, whatever." And not that heartless, but you know what I mean. And the reason why that's so important is because it sets up this quest almost to reconnect with Sarah, his wife. Mm-hmm. And it does it in such a way that's very similar to The Last of Us. And I hate comparing it to The Last of Us because it's on a completely different caliber of game. Even though they share a lot of similarities, it's like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, because you were an only child, right, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah, so for those older siblings out there in the world, when you do the paper mache whatever for your parents and you give it to them, the first time it's like, "Oh, whatever." And then the second born makes it. It's like, "Oh, I've seen this before." It's kind of that situation. But typically, in my situation anyways, my sister always made something better. She was a little bit more gifted artistically than I was. But anyways, I digress. But that's kind of what happened, was that Last of Us Part 2 did a lot of things really well. Days Gone kind of took things that were similar, and it tried to do it. It tried to do a little differently than Last of Us, but sometimes different isn't necessarily better. But going on with the story, I mean, what about it got you involved in it? Because you love this game. I mean, or you really dig it anyways, or you've made it seem like you really love it on the podcast.
I mean, not to be, one of those guys, but yeah, I think I really love the game.
Yeah.
So on the podcast here, we're just showing off the Deacon crouched next to his motorcycle with an infected zombie dragged underneath. Yeah. No, so what makes me a fan of this game was kind of like deep diving into the developers' take on the genre and their just forward thinking of what they wanted to do. And being that the game setting is in their own backyard and they're getting to actually be on location rather easily to make this game as close to the northwestern backwoods as much as possible, and to really see that the love that they put into it, it really shows. And so when you're playing the game and you've seen those developer videos and you listen to what they say, it starts to rein in true. There's a love of crafting this world that has gone into it. Every blade of grass, every tree stump, every abandoned car on the side of the road. But what really draws me in even more on top of that is the love that the characters have for each other and the way that they tell the story and the way that it unfolds. And so you play as this biker who has all these different skills, who he could basically go out there and apply himself and do whatever he wanted to do, and yet has kind of chosen this life for a reason. And at this point, he's juggling the balance of in the duality of life of save my friends, save myself. What do I do? Okay, save my friends. And so you go on these missions where you're risking life and limb to save Boozer, to save other people in the encampments, and to do missions and jobs. And so you become the de facto typical stereotypical character where you're like the hero. You have to do everything. However, your skill sets are kind of limited to where you're basically just defending yourself and, smacking the crap out of zombies and shooting your way through hordes and whatnot. But there's a lot of moments stuck in between where the little moments that you're resting along the roadside at someone's memorial that they had put out for their lost loved ones, or you're going up on top of the hill and you're just overtaking the breathtaking views. they do a really great job of not only telling the story and making you care about the characters, but they make Deacon kind of a neutral guy where he's not a very extremely lovable character like Nathan Drake or
Hmm.
any of the other famous video game characters out there that you would just latch onto. It basically gives you a plain vanilla guy and makes you care about him and his loved ones. And
Hmm.
it does it in a way that I think you could compare it to The Last of Us as far as quality goes. Not just with graphics, but with like the storytelling and the way that they go about things and the way that they keep giving you options for more. Um, I was pleasantly surprised with the story. I was very much towards the end of it, wanting so much more. And when I platinumed the game, I only finished about 70% of the main trophies because the 30% extras were just add-on downloadable content pertaining to like the horde challenges, which is like a separate mode. So when I platinum the game, I still like I was just like in awe and I wanted to keep going and keep going and keep going. And I didn't, which I regret. But having seen almost the entire part of the game, I can really tell you that for those out there who haven't played it, it's a free pickup. It's been 2 years since they released the game, and there is a lot of news media. I'll let you take that one, but there's a lot of news about certain thing where they're not going to be making a sequel, and that actually like was deflating for me as a fan,
Hmm.
knowing what this studio's come from and going from Siphon Filter, the latest, greatest, biggest release until now. How many years later? Into 2019 when they released this, they did a very small studio that came out of nowhere, and boom, they made this great story driven um, open world action adventure game that made people give a crap. And you know, now the news is that they're not going to make a sequel, or Sony like turned them down, so they're moving away into a new project. What's your take on that? That just that hurt.
Yeah, and really, what it comes down to is the developer or the director of Days Gone said that Sony cares more about like Metacritic and
Hmm.
critic reviews more than anything else because that is a quick determining factor of whether or not a game is going to be successful. When in reality, it shouldn't. Even though Days Gone had a 70-ish, like a 75-ish% review rating on Metacritic, it still sold really well. And even now with the free game of the month, it's a free game, so much people are going to pick it up. It's still doing rather well, and the reviews are going up for it because people are enjoying it. The difference is that I think the issue is in 2019, you really got to look at what games came out at the time. You're really competing hard against some pretty big hitters in that time period, as I recall. We'll pull it up to be exact. So 2019, PS4 releases. When Days Gone came out, you were looking at Death Stranding, Sekiro, Resident Evil 2, Control, and so many other games like Modern Warfare, Jedi Fallen Order, Devil May Cry 5. These games are huge. Borderlands 3, Kingdom Hearts 3, and even Metro Exodus. Metro Exodus is one of the games that I praise over and over and over on the podcast
Hmm.
just for its visual aspects and for its drive. But that was the issue with it, was that there was so many games that were really good by AAA developers that have a lot more funding in them. And that's kind of why I don't want to compare it to something like The Last of Us, because Naughty Dogs is a huge company and they have a lot more resources. The voice actors alone are super excited to work on that project because they're super passionate about it. And that I think is one of the things that really hurt Days Gone, was that
Hmm.
you have a studio who's dedicated to make something with what it has, and they did a really good job with it. And I think Sony looks at it as, it's not worth reinvesting into, and that's the unfortunate side of it, is that it just comes down to money at the end of the day. But then you get a near replicant remake, which is a Yoko Taro game, and Yoko Taro games aren't necessarily the pinnacle of popular, but they sell really well for some reason. It's like a cult classic. But Days Gone it's just not quite culty enough, to be to hit Sony's radar for like profitability, which is kind of weird. What do you think on that?
I think you hit the money. You hit the nail right on the head on that one. As far as money goes, money talks, money walks, money does lots of things in today's society. And I think that Days Gone getting a 71% from the Metacritic is the big indicator. Eh, not so popular. So they're
Mm,
like, yeah, you know what? Let's do something else. No, no, gavel smack. No.
mhm,
It's unfortunate though, because if you think about it, they crafted the game based off of the love that they have for their pets, their friends, their family, their culture. The character is actually named off of a street that the head studio director lived on as a child, Deacon St. John. And so the street that kind of came like as a whole thing, the three names came together as like his dog, his street, and something else. And they brought that character together.
mm,
The bikes that are crafted in the game, everything is all about like their favorite pastime and their life and their love for what they do. And in today's world, if you're not the Fortnites and the Call of Duties and the whatever else, if you're not on the flavor of the month, it's just not going to sell, unfortunately. And
mhm,
the more we see games studios turn towards microtransactions and pay to play games and competitive games, the more that these story driven games just don't do as well. And as well as successful as Red Dead Redemption 2 was, it was not, didn't sell what it expected.
mm,
And you look at The Last of Us 2, so much hatred over the release of the game, the story leaks and everything. It didn't sell and do as well as it would. I don't think it's necessarily as much as the games that come out at the same time as much as it is of the genre of games. You're
mm,
seeing single player games become boring to the new consumer, which are children, and you're seeing the market decrease because we're getting older. We're, for me personally, I much rather enjoy a single player game that I can play couch co-op with my wife, or just play to play the story. And
mhm.
kudos to you, you've been knocking them off the shelf. You've been checking off your game bucket list, man, like crazy. Dude, it's like 4 or 5 games already you Snapchatted
Mhm.
me on in the past month or like 2 months that you completed. Kudos to you, by the way.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's like, there's just no market for it anymore unless you're like a repetitive, consistent, like, game like Fortnite and Call of Duty where you're pumping out the microtransactions. It's taking so much attention away from these beautifully handcrafted masterpieces of story writing and environmental storytelling. And it's a shame. It really is, because that's where, to me, maybe we are becoming the niche market. Maybe we're becoming the old put out in the pasture.
Yeah,
Single
yeah.
player games that feel like they're kind of dying off, and they're coming out later and later, and they're taking much longer to develop than they used to, which is unfortunate. And
Mhm.
I think that's a big contributor as to why we're seeing the decrease in these games. And some of these games we're really wanting to see a sequel, we're just not going to get it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's got to be about the demographic that you're trying to hit, and if your
Hmm.
main goal is to make money, you're going to hit where the demographic is the general consumer, where you can attract the most amount of people. The thing that I think Days Gone did that was unique for itself, to give it credit, was it had an interesting story, it had an interesting world, and it wasn't something like Last of Us where it tried to hint to you that you know there is no victory in vengeance. There's no way to speak to what's morally right without showing sacrifice. That was the kind of the beautiful thing about Last of Us Part 2, was they spoke to human nature, and they spoke to the emotions that naturally people have. And when I played Last of Us and I talked about it initially, I was kind of on the fence of whether or not I liked it, whether or not I thought it was a masterpiece, and whether or not I really disliked it. And the reason is because it emotionally made me feel something. That's what controversy's for, is to get someone to talk about it. And
Yeah.
in Days Gone situation, I think they tried to give you a great story, and they did. They gave a compelling enough story for me to finish it. And the issue came down to me was delivery, just the fact that it was okay in delivering it. It was a good story, it had potential, but the issue is that just okay or just good in today's market, especially in a single player experience, it's really hard to keep like it selling, or to keep having that developer get funding, because if they're just going to make okay and good products now, it's so saturated. The video game market is extremely saturated than what it used to be back in like the 2010s, 2014s era. Take a look at Army of Two. You know, that game franchise, as successful as it has, it only released 3 games, and you haven't heard anything. Like, no one's going, "Where's the Army of Two games?" You know, like it's one of those things where the demographic has shifted. You know, and those games were just good. Like, they were good games, but they weren't good enough to continue to make a huge franchise like Splinter Cell. And then the second
Mhm.
Splinter Cell made 2 back-to-back okay games, done. Like, you know, it's the unfortunate thing is that I think a lot of these big developers like Ubisoft, or not developers, publishers, I guess, or distributors, EA, Ubisoft, um, they're really looking for the bottom line at the end of the day, because they have so much money and resources that they need to scrap what's not profitable. They gotta almost predict early, you know, to prevent them from having a cyberpunk esque fiasco. And I think that's wrong. I think you got to take risks, because otherwise we're never going to get innovation in video games. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there were some very unique things that Days Gone did, especially in the crafting system. I mean, I think it's very similar to like Horizon Zero Dawn, a game that we talked about also on the podcast. And I like how it just slows down time and you're crafting in the real world while you're moving. I do like that a lot. Do you want to speak more towards some of the unique mechanics in Days Gone?
So I really like the uniqueness of the resources being spare. Well, not spare, sparse, few and far between, and there is a lot of copy and paste. But the positive side of that is that, for every single vehicle that has the same license plate when they first launched, because they've screwed up the mechanics and they got the same graphic over and over again. For negative things like that, you can talk about all of the beauty of it, of the mechanics and gameplay. And what I really did like, which was what you said, I appreciated being able to craft and reload on the fly. I liked the uniqueness of being able to have your silencer have a lifespan longer than pew 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 done. And I like the degradation of the environment and the game mechanics specifically. I really like how they implemented recoil. I like how they
Mhm.
implemented what the weapons could do. I really, the biggest thing for me, the most unique thing was, is that no matter what you picked up, unless you were John Wick
Mhm.
or Brett, which is John Wick 2.0, unless you're absolutely 100% badass on the controller, everything you picked up had a potential to be fantastic with for one enemy type, but another enemy type, it was like you were just spitting in his face.
Mhm.
And so I remember I stayed away from a lot of the pistols, because in the bigger hordes, you're only getting one, two, three shots off. And so it's a very unique thing where you need to really balance out and plan when you're going out from your base camp and you're going to explore. You're going to go face a horde, you're going to stock up, and
Mhm.
all the different ways that you can. You're crafting ammo, you're crafting molotovs, you're crafting fire bolts, and you're thinking, okay, so do I use an M16, or do I use a shotgun, or do I take both and not take anything else? Do I take this explosive, do I take that? And also finding the resources, having to look for gasoline. That's the one unique thing I like too, is your bike only carries so much fuel, and you can only go so far before you have to refuel. And
Mhm.
I had a blast experimenting several times, purposefully just draining the tank and then having to go out and find fuel, only to find myself in the middle of nowhere,
Mhm.
then having to go run for miles to go get gas, and then on the way back I was met with an enemy horde and I was destroyed. So all these different things in the game, they took a
Mhm.
lot of risks. This was a definite big game of risks, and I think for the majority, the most of them paid off. I think they could have been a little bit more forgiving with the supplies,
Mhm.
and especially when it comes to kerosene, for one.
Oh yeah.
And I like the fact that the uniqueness of, if you were looking for a gas can, find a tow truck. It made sense, right?
Mhm.
If you're looking for a silencer, well, go check out the vehicles and remove the oil filter. Not every single vehicle still had its oil filter, so it made sense to keep having to scavenge and scrounge and look for things. And what I really like about the game is that they had so much personality in the environment, and it felt lived in, even though there's nothing but zombies.
Hmm.
So, and not just in the base camps where people are living, but the world was lived in by these zombies, freakers as they call them,
Hmm.
and they had their own personalities, their own routines that they followed. Each enemy had a different style of the way that it lived, the way that it patrolled an area, the way that it defended itself, the way that it like hoarded itself into this really nasty looking crotchety looking nest that it would infest and just
Yeah.
gets enamored in, and then you having to find resources on the fly. So basically my entire experience, why I love this game, is that I didn't really have the same experience twice. Now there was some repetition and repetitive behaviors, but there was a lot of times where one time I would go up against a horde and I would completely flatline them like they were nothing. The next time I would find a horde that was completely overwhelming, probably one of the biggest hordes, like 250 or whatever, and just having to, oh, what do I do? Plan and
Hmm.
lay traps and booby traps and put a plan of attack together. I really like that on the fly forward thinking, like you have to just kind of come up with things and pull stuff out of your butt, so to speak, in
Hmm.
order
Yeah.
to defend yourself. I really like that about it. Like there was no infinite, everything was finite and very limited,
Hmm.
and it felt very visceral and real. And it made this, it definitely for me turned survival up a notch and just made it a more enjoyable experience.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things was the fact that early on in the game, like, you have like boozer shotgun and stuff like that, and it packs a really good punch. And they destiny to you. You have a really good bike in the beginning and then they take it away from you. Very typical of like video games. They want to show you what you can earn up to eventually. And I
Yeah.
like that aspect that like you're running out of ammo really early in the game, and as you progress on, like you don't have to worry about gas tank as much, and you don't have to worry about ammo capacity as much because you realize
Mhm.
cop cars have ammo, coincidentally. And there's cool stuff like that that I really liked. That it made it really obvious, and you were able to pick on it really quickly. It really sucked though that there's a lot of things that did well, and we're gonna get into it later in the podcast. There's things that it could have done to make the experience in the package just infinitely better. But it did a good job. It did a solid good job of making a world. It just kind of felt empty sometimes because unless you're on your bike, you're walking, and your guy has the stamina of the dude from uh, The Evil Within. Have you know what I'm talking about? The guy can run 2 feet and then
Sebastian, yeah,
yeah,
no,
he passes out. He's like keeled over, and just stands there like like
yeah,
it. Yeah, Deacon can't run, and the irony about it is that Deacon is a former soldier. He served in Afghanistan, you know,
hmm
and the really nice thing about the game, they didn't drop that right away, which I liked. They waited till like the third act to drop the fact that he served. So now that you have had this experience with him, this journey with him, trying to find like whether or not his wife is dead or if his wife is alive or whatever, you see like all the twisted parts of humanity. You see all of how horrible society can be. And now it comes out that he's seen messed up stuff, and that's why he's so normalized to it. It's not because his character is poorly developed. It's because he served and he hated every second of it. He says that. And he said he saw some messed up stuff in Afghanistan, and I think that goes to a really good narrative strategy of not saying here's everything about your character right away. Here's his entire backstory. This is why he's this way. You discover it as you're playing with him. You're experiencing his story, and I thought that was a
hmm
very good way to do that. And because at first I was just like, it's a biker gang, stereotypical biker, like, oh, all about the MC, all about the ride and die sort of thing. And then as the story progressed, I understood more that it was, he wasn't really about the MC. He met this woman who's extremely intelligent, who is like a scientist more or less, and it's kind of like a uh, opposites attract sort of situation. She's really intelligent. He's street smart. She's book smart. You know, and It's like Grease.
hmm
Like Sandy and freaking. I forget what his name is. It's been so long since I've watched Grease, but it's like that. It's like you got the bad guy and the good girl sort of
hmm
situation, and he doesn't necessarily need that life. It's like he leaves the MC life or the patch, I guess, whatever they call it. I don't know. I'm not part of an MC, so I wouldn't know. And he goes to like marry Sarah and like, put down that life, in order to settle down with her, because he realizes that like that's who he wants to be with. And it's really a great story in that regard, as like you see how loyal he is to his wife. Even 2 years after the outbreak, he still believes that she's alive.
Hmm.
Even though people are telling him that like it's impossible, he's been to multiple sites where like helicopters have crashed and been overrun, and he constantly hears it. Um, but then one day he hears that O'Brien's alive, and he figures out he has to go chase after O'Brien to figure out what happened. And then by working with O'Brien, O'Brien tells him that his wife was able to go to a different camp, but that camp got overrun. So he then realized that his wife wasn't a civilian, so she wouldn't have gotten actually moved to that camp because she had clearance. She would have gone with the Nero team that O'Brien was part of, and from there he's able to track her down, and he goes on this massive adventure exploring the state, and that's something where it all comes back down to his love for his wife, and I really value that. I really appreciate that. That is something we can all get behind. I think that that's something that as a person, you can respect someone's, love for their dog, love for their kids, love for their wife. I think love is something that we can all get behind. It's an emotion that we all understand.
Hmm.
But the fact that you've got somebody who this is literally everything for him, so he's got nothing to lose, and the days gone are the days without her, that that was what I really enjoyed about the game. That below the surface understanding of the message behind Days Gone is that this is his life. His life is not to be a biker. His life is to be with her, and he could just tell that he's like, I have a hunch that she's still out there, and he keeps hoping and praying, um and it's a great message. It's a great message. And I think it's something that's better than The Last of Us that kills off Joel within like 10 minutes. I think it's a lot happier than than The Last of Us.
Yeah, I think speaking to that, they were just looking for shock value, to be honest, because that was got to be one of the dumbest decisions ever in video game history to
Yeah.
do it that quick, that early. I could see at the end,
Yeah.
but at the beginning, no, dumb. Anyways,
Yeah.
what we're talking about, Days Gone. What drew me in? So I'm playing the game. So the blanket behind me is Sons of Anarchy blanket that I was given. That is one of the greatest TV shows, in my opinion, that have ever been on television. And I had finished like binging it for a second time and rewatching it, and then Days Gone came. Like the media released it that it was coming out, and it was like, oh, what's this? This looks awesome.
Mhm.
So it was the familiarity of understanding the biker culture, either the club, the greater good of sacrificing yourself for the club and all that stuff. And so when I'm playing Days Gone, when I get it, I'm so excited and I'm playing it and I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. And you get kind of getting a little bit of a fantasy, My life didn't take that route where I could be a biker or do things like that and have the freedom and to roam and whatnot. So it's like, you're living a fantasy. You're just enjoying it, eating it up. And then he's talking about, like you come across the mission where he goes past the church where he got married. And it's like he was going to go what's called nomad, which is he's going to go and still stay with the charter, but be on his own and kind of like being on call, so to speak, and kind of be free to go where he wants to go. And he was going to do that with his wife and leave that life behind, so to speak, and kind of focus on her. And then just the storytelling of like what had me sold in the early beginning was when you get to the crash site where the
Yep.
chopper that she was in went down. He is there standing on what's like a makeshift gravestone, and it's a memorial to his wife. And he kneels before it and starts talking, and it's like this incredible, just like emotional feeling, like he misses her, but he just still feels like she's out there. And that's just like, oh man, that really just drew me in. Like, we've got to find her, we got to push this
Mhm.
story, and you got to see what happens. And it's like, when it finally does happen later on in the story and you get to that, and spoilers,
Mhm.
pause it if you don't want to hear it, she's alive and she's been at
Yep.
this military camp helping them with research and with experimentation and with doctoring people up and things like that. And when you find out like, hey, holy crap, they just bring it out of the blue, sort of, which is, I guess you could say it's kind of predictable, but
Hmm.
they just kind of fling it on you and surprise you with it. And it's not quite the reunion love letter you're expecting,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
my weird take on that. Like, that was a little weird for me. It wasn't because of Deacon doesn't want to give away the position that they know each other, because they're afraid that the encampment, the military camp, they're gonna like freak out and like try to kill them both, or they'll get in trouble. So they pretend to be total strangers. But I mean, after a year and a half, 2.5, however long it takes you till you get to her, to have that much time, and then they see each other but they can't embrace unless they're private, that was a little awkward for
Mhm.
me. But good storytelling, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. It just cheapened the like embrace of all that work, and she's been safe this whole time in
Hmm.
this military camp thinking you're dead, and moving on with her life really in a way where she's trying to become something of use and continue to be that good-hearted person. That was the only redeeming quality. Is later on you realize what she was doing and all of what she was up to was for the greater good, and that was her main focal point.
Hmm.
So that was the redeeming quality. But yeah, I was a little
Yeah.
bit upset at the way that it all transpired.
Speaking of upset, what I got really upset about was spoilers again. So before you go into the military camp, you see this guy, this captain, who's got your ring on that you gave Sarah. And I'm like,
Mm.
we about to murder this man? We about to
Yeah.
kill? And then I'm like, that stanky hoe. Like, like I'm like, she don't even wait 2 years to give my ring to somebody else.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm like, God, I'm like, wow, thanks, Sarah. But
Yep.
so I saw that ring, but like they confiscate your jewelry when you come into the camp, and that's how the rings
Mhm.
get distributed. They melt it down to make like bullets and stuff like that, I think, or they use it to make bombs and stuff like that. I forget what exactly it was, but they melt down the material. Um, but you didn't like the fact that they couldn't embrace right away because like you've been searching forever. Here's what I interpreted from that is that when Deacon first met her, he looked at her and was like, "That's not my wife," because her attitude and the way she spoke, she changed, because she thought this whole time he was dead, and her attitude towards society about just winning this war, because she says it's a war we can win, that that was not who his wife was. His wife was a pacifist. He was the enforcer in the MC. He was the one who served for his country. He was the one who went and killed people in Afghanistan. He was that person. That was not something that his wife ever did. That was not, that was not her calling. And he looked at that situation as like, this is no longer the woman that, I love, but she's still there. And he still doesn't give up hope. Like he wants to save her. He wants to bring her back to who she was, because that's who she really is. She's not this person who's thrown into this really shitty situation. She's not a person who goes out and murders, a bunch of zombies. She is a person who looks at a newt or whatever it's called and refers to it as someone's child, because at some point that kid was someone's child, you know. And that was really for Deacon what kind of sparked the fact that she's still in there, is that she's able to look at like a zombie's humanity and realize that at one point that was a human. But before that, before when he first came to the camp, it was like, we're just gonna kill all the zombies, we're gonna win this
Mhm.
war. And that was something that I really liked, was that, oh, she's not the same. And I was really afraid that, it would come to the choice where you either had to drink the Kool-Aid with her or we had to kill her. And this isn't The Last of Us. We can kill people in this game. That's the one thing I really liked about this game. You can kill douchebags in this game. Schizo, the Eminem wannabe looking guy, like he was wearing like the sideways cap, the big jacket, like like straight out of like a cliche New Yorker in like Law and Order, like a New York white gangster out of Law and Order SVU. That's how he
Mhm.
looked. His name was Schizo. I was so happy when I just was able to just slit that guy's throat. He was a piece of shit. He was such a piece of shit.
He was.
Yeah. I forget exactly what he did. Oh, he sold us out to these rippers. You want to talk about rippers really quick? Do you
So
remember?
yeah, so the
Yeah.
Rippers were this like subculture of humans that kind of like align themselves kind of like in the beliefs of like there's no god, we're all doomed, we serve one person, and it's kind of like your satanic cult, satanic demonic devil worshiping cult wrapped into like this group of people that are just so far jaded from the whole thing. They decide to try to live like the enemy to kind of have this commonality so they'll be left alone. And the Rippers definitely just like drank the Kool-Aid of one man, and that was pretty much the entire side thing. And what you're talking about with the Rippers of Schizo, I wanted to shoot Skizzo in the back of the head when I heard he was skipping out on his chores, man.
Yo.
I'm like, dude, you ain't pulling your weight, bro. You're dead weight. Get out of here.
Oh,
Yeah,
jeez.
I didn't like him from the get go. From the moment he opened his mouth and he had that stupid hat on, I was done with him.
Yeah, I looked at him. I'm like, man, what? Dude's like, it's sunny out. It's not even snowing and crap. The guy's got a
hmm
big parka on. I'm like, that guy's got to be sweating his ass off.
I
Like,
thought he either had like drugs hidden in there or
yeah,
like he was like the merchant. Hello, stranger. And you pull out his jacket and he's got like all this gear he's selling. I don't know. Yeah, I just Gizzo just like a turd.
yeah. Well, what's nice is that, with the Rippers, it does tie back to Deacon's past, and we're not going to spoil that for you. The one thing we
Mhm.
won't spoil. Actually, we're going to spoil it. I'm kidding. We're not. But the Ripper, the Ripper whole story was really awesome. I liked how everything tied together. Um, and closing thought before we hit the save point this week, the fact that every main story line, quote unquote, had like a percentage, and if you completed a part of one storyline, it could also help progress another one. I did like that
Mhm.
because it wasn't like, oh, you're at 50% here, and now you've progressed super far into this side quest, quote unquote, technically, that this main quest is like now makes no sense. They progress at the same time. I kind of like that. Like, I like the fact that if I did something in Copeland's camp, who is probably my favorite camp, by the way, even though he's a crazy, like, conspiracy theorist guy, like, I liked it. I liked the concept that Cope ran a podcast, and he ran a podcast before the apocalypse, and then you're going throughout all of Oregon, and you just hear his podcast randomly, and he's like, Cope out. Don't believe the lies. Like, I love that. I
Yeah,
love that. Uh,
yeah.
and so that was why it was my favorite camp, is because that's going to be Matt if the zombie apocalypse happens. He's going to be like, this is McKeaton out. Don't believe the lies. Like,
Put my little tinfoil hat on,
yeah, exactly.
just in case.
Exactly. But that being said, Matt, I think it's time for the save point.
Save point.
Oh, yeah. Gotta love that. I love the soundboard, man. Gosh.
You got to knock it up a notch. Like, oh
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so the for this week's save point, we don't have any comments because we had some spam that we had to sift through. A lot of spam, a lot of spam comments on the YouTube channel. So you're welcome for sifting out through that. But we got a Rode Procaster, and it like lets me do a bunch of stuff now, so that you know, being remote from Matt, I can control the podcast, and it's been really awesome messing with it. But I got it delivered to my parents' house because at the apartment complex we don't trust the apartment complex with stuff like that. Um,
No.
and my dad's first thing was like, he's like, you're gonna like have like the DJ beats like the like yeah, like maybe at some point, and then like it's just awesome. It's awesome, and that's kind of what's been new on the just digital hardware side of things. What's been new with you, Matt?
A lot actually. So my family came down from Milwaukee, and my cousin Candace and her new baby and her boyfriend Steven
Mm-hmm.
and her best friend PJ, they all came down to Texas to get a little bit of Southern culture. And they came down, and I got the flu shortly before that. So
Oh,
part of what's been dragging just the digital episodes up a little bit is I got sick for about a week, and my wife got sick too, and so I wasn't able to really spend time with them except for their final night. So I took them all out to eat, had a great time, got to catch up, and spent a couple of days with Tim and his wife Akia as well. and just had a good time. Really starting to kind of like live life and just experience new things. And it's like, we're having cigars and having some drinks and just enjoying the atmosphere Texas has to offer and just
Mhm.
living life one step at a time. And it's been great. Um, that's the biggest positive thing that's come out of the negative, which is the no graphics card.
Yeah.
You bots, you better chill because I need a graphics card.
Yeah.
Get this beast back up and running. But yeah, just been solely focused on work and quality of life time at home, and trying to fit in stuff for the podcast when I can. And it's been great. It's been a trying time, but it's been a good time, and I've been enjoying it.
Yeah. Same here. I've been just kind of taking the time to, like, play games and, just kind of, like you said earlier in the podcast, grind through that backlog. And really what it's come down to is I've just been playing less and less PC and less multiplayer shooters.
Mhm.
And it has been, I don't know if it's been a godsend or if it's been horrible for me, because I can't tell if, you know, I have anxiety or if I have stress at work because I can't relieve my anxiety and stress through a first person shooter, or I don't know if it's just, like I'm having withdrawals. But I've also noticed that I've been doing a lot more now that I'm not playing like Call of Duty or Apex. It's been nice to be able to play single player games. And that's why one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about Days Gone was because it was a game that I've dropped 60 hours into. It's been a while since I've dropped that much time into a single player experience, you know? And it was really good. I mean, okay, we're about to get into the final part of the podcast in a little bit. When I say really good, ladies and gentlemen, it was a really good experience and a really good game. But there's a reason why I give it a 7 out of 10, or maybe even a 6.5 out of 10. And it's going to be a really good point, even though it had potential to be an 8 out of 10. I said originally it was an 8 out of 10, but there's a reason why. I'm going
Mhm.
to tell you in a little bit here. But I mean, it was a really good experience. I still don't regret playing it. I mean,
That's good.
I still okay. If you ever in a PlayStation party with me and I'm complaining about a game, it's because that's how I deal with sucking at the game in that moment, most likely. But but typically I complain about the same thing repeatedly, expecting different results. It's insanity. Like, I'll die the same way, and I'm like, why do I keep dying this way? It's because you keep running head on into the horde. Like, there's stuff like that where it's more of a Brett thing than actually a bad mechanic in the game. But then I discovered a bad mechanic, and I was just livid. Um, but no, I miss playing games with you on PC. And it's been tough to connect, and
Yeah.
we're doing our best here at Dista Digital. So I mean, if you guys have any topics or you have any comments you want us to read, feel free to reach out to us with the hashtag DistaDigital on Twitter, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube video. Don't give us spam because we don't want to have to sift through that. Or you can always feel free to reach out to us on our Discord and other social medias as well. Also, go to the website on Podbean and you can find us there as well. We don't know. Whatever you want to talk about, we'll talk about. We're pretty tame here. We're pretty chill, to be honest, at the Just a Digital podcast.
That's
I,
how we roll.
yeah, gotta get some more YouTube comments, YouTube content out. Gosh, it's been so long.
That's
You
for
take a
sure.
week
Well,
off of the podcast, and your pronunciation of words is just out the roof. Or out the window. Oh my gosh. Oh my
I
goodness.
gotta say that last episode I did appreciate the editing on that you did. Yeah, we'll get some more YouTube content out as soon as I get my baby back up and running.
Oh yeah.
And hopefully if there's a few less bots in the world and there's a few less people camped outside of a micro center, you fellow Houstonians, crazy people. We'll get one here eventually soon and get this kick started again. But yeah, I mean, you know, everything happens for a reason, right? And sometimes you just gotta take some steps back and reassess things and just work with what you got. So
Exactly. In closing thoughts here, I mean, Days Gone is not getting a sequel. Sony's
mhm.
declined. We talked about it briefly with just not having the right amount of monetary value to it. I want to hear your negatives with Days Gone, and then we'll get into my big rant. But I want to hear your opinion first, honestly.
So I think the biggest drawback that the game had, as far as the negative side of it, is the repetitious gameplay and the limited animation set for Deacon. where
Yeah.
the only real way that you could really avoid the zombies, the freakers, was to kind of like break the game and do a quick roll consistently with reloading, and just the way that you really moved in the game, and it really felt like the animations were definitely a generation behind.
Mhm.
I was really not impressed with like the swinging of melee weapons
Oh yeah.
and some of the gun mechanics, some of the reload animations, things like that. I mean, I get he's not trying to be John Wick, but they could have just definitely added the fact that he knows weapons. He's a former soldier, so they tell you later on in the game, you find out, hey, he's good with weapons. You've kind of figured that out throughout the game, but it just felt like for someone who knows weapons, he really just kind of was dorky about it, and
Yeah.
it just it didn't fit the experience like of a seasoned veteran. And if you look at someone who served in the military, they would know how to fire a gun, they would know how to clean a gun. Just little nuances about the gunplay and the combat. But for me, I think the biggest stumble was the repetitious gameplay with, go to an area, clear it out, and no more zombies would come back, or like you'd clear out the horde, you'd kill off the horde, and then they wouldn't repopulate, which is fine. But when you do that, you take the only living thing that's in the game to talk to. You're either talking to humans or smacking freakers. That's all there is to do.
Mhm.
And mix that with the fact that they put in the typical collectible hunt that you have to go on, the Easter egg hunt that they did in Uncharted. That was just
Yeah.
so like,
I
why?
forgot all about
That was
that.
definitely something that they did definitely overthought. I could tell by the look on your face. I probably took one of the things you were gonna say.
No, I totally forgot about the collectible thing, and that's it goes into like the main thing I hate about this game.
Yeah.
Oh
So
god.
the biggest thing I also didn't like was the fact that, and it could be good for some people. So they had the main story, and then they had two other stories, big time, like they could be their own single player stories.
Mhm.
And that is the side of like following the Rippers and following that backstory. That could have been its own main campaign. On top of that, you had the Nero conspiracy, and you're going to these areas and kind of like listening in on their conversations as they're like live testing on dead freakers, or
Mhm.
you're picking up audio tapes and you're hearing some of their experiments gone wrong. The medical side of the game, is that Nero side, is very fascinating, but I
Yes.
think what they did was they had three huge things going on at once, and they didn't really shore up and like gloss over and beautify one in particular to make it like top caliber type story. I think the failing part on their part was they had too much scope and not enough polish. And
Mhm.
so the Nero story finishes extremely disappointing. The Ripper story, however, was very redeeming for the game and was very like heartfelt
Mhm.
once you finally meet up with somebody that you saved early on in the game, or didn't save depending on how you handle it. This So that the main story just kind of felt like an afterthought. Like
Mhm.
what they did for the main part of the game is you're taking that final ride and you're going through the game and they're playing the credits. It's kind of like you just left with that taste of like, I want more. And unfortunately, because of the whole news break that they're not doing another one, is disappointing. And I think that's the biggest letdown for me. That's my biggest gripe and criticism, as far as that goes.
Yeah. I mean, for Days Gone, like you're right, the Ripper campaign was phenomenal. Like I thought that was awesome. The Nero campaign, or the conspiracy, like the secret ending to the game, spoiler alert, obviously, is that the freakers, like the O'Brien is a freaker. Whoa, ooh, who saw that coming? Nobody. I mean, I guess I kind of saw it coming because they didn't show his face in the second part of the game. Like you see his face in the opening part, but then you never see it again. So I'm like, he's got to be like either the headless horseman or he's got to be like some weird mutation. So I kind of saw it coming a mile away.
Mhm.
But the fact that that opened up, Days Gone 2, that's a real shame. Like they put it out there, you know, it's kind of like the Easter egg that you put in there just in case you get to make a second game. But I don't think they might have had the intention of making a second game based around that, but I think they just put it out there just to like put it out there. I don't necessarily think it
Mhm.
was anything game breaking. It wasn't like a huge cliffhanger. It was very Horizon Zero Dawn cliffhanger ending. Like you feel satisfied with the ending, quote unquote, and then there's a potential for a second game because that was a standalone secret mission, more or less. You found Sarah, you were able to ride off into the sunset in an unskippable credits cutscene. Gamesin right there. Gamesin times 10. But what got me was after you beat the game, you can do all the stuff and try to platinum the game. The only time the game autosaves in this game is when you complete a main story quest. So now that the game is over, anytime I die, I go back to either a neuro checkpoint that I cleared out or a side quest that happens to be on the main story like path. So if I find collectibles, clear out camps, clear out horde nests, and then die to a giant horde, I have to do all that over again. And that kept on happening repeatedly. And it was so aggravating because the game only auto saves if you stand near the bike. And the worst part about it is it doesn't auto save if you're getting onto the bike, if you're moving on the bike. If you so much as have the bike tipped over, it doesn't auto save. It is like, it just aggravated me. And don't get me wrong. I'm relying on the autosave. Technically, that's my bad. But the fact that it was so much progress could be lost in this, like you could lose an hour of progress, like I did on a live stream, and that's aggravating. That's super aggravating because it's not game breaking, but it's very annoying. Especially after you've already beat the game. Because before, when I was playing the main game, I never had experienced this. It was the second you beat the game, and there's no more main quests. Because I didn't die much. I didn't die until the horde started coming in, and that's in the third act where they extended out the story, I think, a little too long by having you do useless stuff, very dated side quests towards the end for some reason. But they Tomb Raidered, Rise of the Tomb Raidered me, where I'm like, all right, we're about 80% of the way through the game, but that 80% to 90% is just, it felt like an eternity. It was the same thing with the trebuchets in Rise of the Tomb Raider, which I always talk about on the podcast. Like that one section, if you were to remove it from Rise of the Tomb Raider, game would have been 10 out of 10 for me. If you were to remove the third act of Days Gone, the game would have probably still been an 8 out of 10 for me. But, I mean, and not to leave it on a bad note, it's just that one thing, you gotta do better than that,
Yeah.
It was very nearsighted is what I said on my stream, and I stand by that. I stand by the fact that it was pretty nearsighted for them to not think that could have potential flaws and potentially hurt the gameplay experience of certain players, But Matt, do you have any closing thoughts here before we start to wrap up today's podcast?
I think it's worth a mention of the game just for people to play it. I mean, download it if you have PlayStation Plus. It's free. You don't have to download it, but just add it to your library so you'll always have it. And it's one of the games I'm definitely looking forward to touching going for whenever in God's green earth I can acquire a PlayStation 5 and be able to play it on the next gen, because I was watching your stream and it looked really nice. I mean, it looked really nice compared to its counterpart. And also, for those of you who don't know, it's actually been 2 years since the game came out, so they finally put it on the store. They aren't making a sequel, but they have a sort of remastered, upgraded generational leap that's coming out for the PC, and I believe it's coming out next month in May, about this time next month. And I could be wrong on the timing, but it's coming out really soon. And it's definitely like a better draw distance, better graphics, better smoother frame rate, all this, etc. And they're bringing it to the PC, which I think is fantastic, which makes me cry even more in my current situation. But yeah, for those of you who haven't had a chance to play it, it's definitely one of those games where if you're a single player gamer and you just really love story and you love a challenge and you love having objectives to do, and you love just like completing a map, sort of like Assassin's Creed style, where you just go and do everything and level everything out, it really just becomes it's a great experience overall. You can't judge it by one thing or another. It's one of these games that's a total package that you actually don't understand unless you've been exposed to it, and unfortunately in today's market you haven't been enough. And it's kind of one of those games, like you said, that flipped under the radar with all those bigger titles. I mean, I'm one that got Death Stranding as well, and I played them both right around the same time. Didn't care. Death Stranding came out at the end of the year, and then this one came out in April. But you know, it's one of those things you should definitely experience it. It's one of those great first party titles by Sony, and I think that it's definitely deserving of a sequel. And hopefully that petition that they have going online grows and grows and grows, because ultimately that just means that they may have to take a second look at it and reassess it and say, hey, you know what, let's greenlight it. And you know, keep in mind it's dead, so it's going to be several years down the road, maybe at the end of the PlayStation 5 life cycle, if we're lucky enough to get a sequel. If not, hey, it was a great ride. I enjoyed it. I recommend anybody to pick it up and play it. And if we haven't shared enough enthusiasm and enough deep dive on it, play it for yourself. Check it out. It's really worth it. It really is.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry about that little fade in there for the outro. I didn't think you'd have so much to say there at the end, so I started fading in the music. We're working on it here at Dista Digital. We're working on
Work in progress.
Yeah, we're working on our effects coming in, you know. So bear with us on that, ladies and gentlemen. But I mean, yeah, Days Gone, it was a really enjoyable experience, to be honest. I really thought that, you know, it did provide something that was truly unique, that, you know, lacked in the space, you know, a zombie game that wasn't just about killing zombies all the time. You know, it was about the people, which I really liked. And I think that you're right. It maybe doesn't deserve a sequel yet, but I think a Kickstarter or something down the road would not be out of the question. But only time will tell, I guess, you know. But anyways, guys, I think that's all the time we have this week for Dista Digital. And this time I'm actually going to fade in the music at the right time. Like I said, work in progress. Working live. It's kind of hard to work with live sometimes, but
it is.
Whatever. Anyways, guys, if you ever have a comment or you have a topic you want us to talk about, feel free to reach out to us on our social medias with the hashtag DistaDigital.
And don't forget, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, pretty much everywhere you can think of. Look up Dista Digital. We're there. You can check us out. We're always sharing some of our favorite gaming stories, and we appreciate y'all.
Yes. And from all of us here at Dista Digital, I'm Brett Clark.
And I'm Matt Keaton, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, y'all.
Live, man. Live always just messes up with us, you know?
It's okay.
Yeah.
I love it.